Every road in and out of Roundup is closed. The lone exception, Highway 12 from Forsyth.
That is because Roundup once again inundated with floodwater from the Musselshell River. It happened overnight. Harleton, Lavina also suffering from some flooding.
This spring, Montanans weathered extreme flooding conditions throughout much of the state. One of the most severely impacted areas were the communities along the Musselshell River in central Montana. While farmers and ranchers along the river are used to high water each spring, the Musselshell flooded at historic levels, leaving many underwater for a month or more. While the damage is devastating, many did what those in agriculture know how to do. They put one foot in front of the other and began picking up the pieces. The Tabor Ranch, near Shawmut, experienced high levels of water for 5 weeks. Forced to leave their home and hope for the best, Eugene and Linda Tabor shared their story and what they're doing to get back on track.
It's done that before, so we didn't really get excited. Right?
But it's definitely high flood water.
It was high flood water when it runs through there. It's high flood water. And so we're out there, and the daughter's taking pictures, and you know how nice it is. And the next morning we get up, and yeah, it's getting serious. It creeps up like this. And Jimmy come down, and we're thinking we're going to have to get furniture up. I mean, things are really getting serious. We're going to have to get stuff out of the barn and everything up. And he says, "Why didn't we do this yesterday?" So we did. I went into town, and at the local grocery store, she had some of those milk crates. So everything was up on milk crates. The son-in-law was really getting excited. He said, "We just need to go to Billings or Big Timber and get a U-Haul and get your furniture out of here while we can." By then the water is about a foot over the whole yard. I mean, it's really getting serious. And he just kept saying, "Oh, we've been through this before. It'll be okay. We'll just get the furniture up." So we got the furniture up and got everything onto high ground. And when we left, it was raining, and it was over a foot deep going through the yard already. So I told Jimmy, I said, "Well, I guess you get company." So we went up and stayed with him, and it was 5 weeks before we could come home.
While the Tabors lost fences and acquired loads of debris, their main concern is the irreversible effects of erosion throughout the river bottom.
The biggest irreversible damage is erosion. Wherever the river made a big bend, and usually it's a hayfield, we lost quite a bit of ground. And another spot, at the end of this hayfield, where it's never ran over before, the river, it's a high bank. The water was high enough here. By the time the river gets down there, it's a lower elevation. When it dropped over the bank, it eroded back into the field a ways. Not a big deal. The biggest inconvenience as far as erosion is right down here next to the highway, and it actually cut another channel. And that, in fact, I haven't even walked over to look at it. I just didn't even want to think about it yet. But that'll require some work there.
The floodwaters took their toll on banks, dams, and diversion structures, but the largest amount of damage is where the river cut entirely new channels through paths it's never taken before.
Built here before we bought this, and some riprap work done. But in '97, it went over the top and made a little hole here, but it didn't wash anything out, and it never been repaired.
They may never be able to repair the damage done by erosion. However, Eugene feels that much of this damage could have been prevented if the 310 and 401 permitting laws were not so prohibitive and the requirements within the permits were not so costly.
The biggest thing that I just hate to see is where the river washes into a hayfield. And I'm you know, the new environmental laws that prohibit you from being in the stream to do anything, that's just been a burr under my blanket for a long time. Had we been able to do a little gravel work, which is a real no-no, disturbing the riverbed, we could have saved a lot of this over the years. It's moved more dirt and more gravel than all the ranchers on the Musselshell could move in the next 150 years. In one season, that's what's happened. You know, there's programs, you can get a 310 permit and then comply with SCS regulations of how it has to be done. You just as well give them the ranch because that's what it costs to do it the way they want it done. It's prohibitive. You can't, if you have 1,000 feet of bank, you just cannot afford to riprap that.
While the Tabors realize they have days of cleanup ahead of them, they are thankful they received minimal damage and operations on their ranch will return to normal. Downriver, near Melstone, Bill and Jennifer Bergen and their family were also weathering deep water. But with a feedlot full of hungry cattle, they could not sit on the sidelines and watch. Their homes and outbuildings became an island surrounded by the Musselshell, and they did the best they could to keep buildings and livestock dry.
Flooding started May 27th, and we were preparing for it probably about a week beforehand. We knew that something was coming, we didn't know how much. The day, 2 days before this flood, we pulled our electronics out of our scale and we started trucking feed up to our feed lot. For I think we got a week's worth of feed up there. We had about 3,500 head of cattle up there we had to feed. Plus we had cows on the other side of the river and feed on this side of the river. So, and we hadn't been able to get them out to pasture yet. We hadn't been able to brand. And when it flooded, we were delayed until about 20th of June before we got everything out to pasture. So we had to feed them extra month. The day before the flood, we hauled more feed. Actually, I saw a picture about 9 o'clock that evening before the flood about how much water was actually coming here, and that was from Roundup. And we decided to move a whole haystack that night. We must have moved about 200 bales.
Got in at 3:30 in the morning.
Got in bright and early in the morning, and we didn't build dikes around our house yet. And water showed up a little after 4. Got back up, got the backhoe out, started building dikes around our houses. We're able to save basements and stuff. After that, we actually took tractor to the highway the day of the flood, and we were going to try to figure out a way to get back around to our feedlot to feed them, but a neighbor fed them that morning, and we didn't want to get in front of the water and not be able to get back around, so we stayed home. But we also warned a couple people downstream to get out of their house, and they took the advice, got out, and actually saved a lot of their stuff. Then after that, we pretty much got our big tractor through the water and had a 4-wheeler on it, and we were able to take it. We had water up to the engine going through it, but we made it down to the bridge and made it over to our cattle the next day, and were able to feed and go through stuff and kind of get an idea of what was going on.
When the water finally started receding, Bill and Jennifer began to take stock of what was left behind. While the destruction is extensive, their biggest concern is the damage done to the Delphia-Melstone Canal and the Musselshell Ditch Company irrigation systems they rely on.
On our irrigation system, we have major damage up by the river on the canals. Right now it's running uncontrollably into a dump structure. We had to cut it in 3 or 4 spots to get rid of the water, and we've just now started to fill those in, and then we are waiting for the water to go down far enough to fix the canal. And total fix job would be probably between $100,000 and $200,000 on just the canal part.
They remain uncertain whether or not the canal users will receive any state or federal assistance in repairing the canals. With millions of dollars in repairs necessary to allow irrigation, Bill is not sure how they will continue to irrigate. That is just one of several questions the Bergens are still trying to answer.
What do we do to prevent the next one? I mean, how much money do you spend to ensure that you don't get flooded the next time? I mean, those are questions you got to ask. I mean, do we raise our scale up 3 feet, 4 feet to keep it out of the water, or do we just pull electronics next time like we did this time? Do we build our dikes higher, bigger, and stand more water, or do we leave them alone and just let it flood? Like our silage pits down there, I don't think we can afford to move them around, and we never have seen water up there ever, so long, you know, that anybody can remember around here, and they got flooded about 4 feet deep. So how much do you do to prevent it? I mean, that's a big question, and a lot of it you probably can't prevent, you just got to deal with.
Craig and Kendi Jensen, ranchers west of Lavina, also spent weeks dealing with floodwater. While they were able to stay in their home, they still suffered damage to roads, hayfields, and outbuildings.
Well, we started to flood on the 23rd of May, and by the 24th it started to get deep here. And the water got high, and then within a week the water level had gone down. And then got another rainstorm, and it came up, and it come up and filled the corrals, the barns, the outbuildings, got everywhere except our houses. And it stayed for practically 2 weeks, and it was higher than we'd ever experienced on our place before. And at the time the water was coming up, I didn't expect it to even get nearly as high as it did. But we were using boats and tractors to get in and out of here. And by the 18th of June, the night of the 18th, is when the water started to go down to where getting in and out of here we didn't have to drive through water. So it was from about the 24th of May to the 18th of June that we had high water.
Years ago, when the Milwaukee Railroad was put in, it created a buffer between the Jensen Ranch and the Musselshell River. Flood damage to the abandoned railroad bed could lead to the river rerouting right through the Jensen's barnyard.
Where the railroad bed is between our ranch and the river. And this is our buffer. And if this ever washes out, the whole river will end up on the other side of the railroad bed and down right through our ranch. So this has been our biggest concern right here, is how much this is washed out. And you can kind of see that there's not much left here before it'll go all the way through.
Not being able to irrigate isn't just a decrease in crop production. It's a total loss of time, money, and resources invested into efficient irrigation.
Our irrigated hay is what we rely on. And we've invested so much into that. And when you do something like that, when you invest in pivots or any kind of irrigation that requires electricity and a huge investment to begin with, you can't mess around with it. You've got to grow a good crop under it. You've got to fertilize, you've got to seed correctly, and you've got to irrigate it. You've got to do it all right to make it worth the time and money. And so when you lose that ability to irrigate, then you start wondering exactly what the next step should be, because it does take a lot of investment, and those things don't last forever. And so you kind of make a commitment, and then when something like this happens, then you have to take a step back and see what the next. You never complain about the rain. I mean, we flooded down here, and we weren't very happy about all that, but we had a wonderful spring for out in the pastures and for the cows. And
I didn't say one word about the rain through the whole time. Because if you remember 10 years ago,
yeah,
I'd rather be in this situation than that situation.
We still haven't forgot about the drought we were in.
Mother Nature's not static, she's dynamic, and that means she's going to change. Never going to stay the same. And that river for the longest time has been confined due to geology, some of the rims that it runs along. And it was also confined when they put in the Milwaukee Railroad and the highway. And so it's been told to go this way for 100 years. You know, Montanans are a tough bunch and they're very resilient. And I've already seen people pulling debris, trying to get their irrigation structures back functioning again, and out there leveling their fields. Some people were cut off from access to them, but as long as they can access them, they're trying to rebuild.